So what if Classic Plus does come? Everyone already knows that there's some form of fresh Classic on the way, and many people are optimistic that it's going to come with real positive changes. I never genuinely thought I'd see the day where I'm slightly excited about a Classic era relaunch, or a fresh server, as people are obviously calling it, or Classic Plus. That's what this video is about. This video isn't fact, it isn't researched, it isn't even speculation, it's just purely my opinion on how a Classic Plus could be done, what it could really look like, and specific changes, in some cases, to specific classes, to make the game really feel fresh. And I don't mean fresh as in a restart, I mean a new feeling game, but still holding on to that nostalgia. You may like some of the ideas, you may like none of it, but please do tell me how much you hate me in the comments, because I always appreciate that. Before I get into exactly how I think this could be done, let's look at the scope first. And by scope, I mean let's really sit down and make a list of rules, or, you know, certain things that are going to happen or not going to happen in the game's life cycle. So firstly, it will never progress past level 60. This means TBC and future expansions will never come. This is a hard, fast rule. No one will ever reach 61 in a Classic Plus era of the game. New content will be added, and it could even be raids of future expansions, but in a time-walking fashion using Caverns of Time. This means it doesn't need to fit in the current timeline of lore. This will make sense in a minute, I think. Future content could introduce new classes such as DK, Monk and Demon Hunter. Classes that we're used to seeing in future expansions, but these could be added early. They could be added as a kind of time remnant, where the abuse of time walking over the course of the content patch, the expansion, whatever you want to call it, has caused timelines to collide. Yes, think of the Flash, if you will. So these Demon Hunters, these DKs, when they're introduced in major content patches, would be classed as the time remnants are being added to the game because they're out of time. They're out of their own timeline, but playable in a Classic Plus version of the game. Probably lost some of you already. Finally, they will have actual GMs again, and I mean in-game GMs, to control the botting situation. You report someone for botting and you see a physical action being taken. Hell, do it like private servers and announce it in global chat that someone's been hit with a ban hammer for botting. It will get people to think twice if they're seeing accounts actively being banned in chat. I said finally, I didn't really mean finally. Mage and Paladin boosting is eliminated from existence, either through making mobs who haven't managed to get a physical swing on a target for say 30 seconds, they gain a movement speed buff, or they become immune to slows and stuns and crowd controls, etc. While the whole boosting meta has never really bothered me too much, it does encourage RMT too much for my liking, because by nature, most MMO players are lazy and take the path of least resistance to get to the end game, much like I probably would. Now let's start with the basics, the leveling experience. I've gone backwards and forwards on this for days preparing for this video, and you was originally going to get me saying, yo, give us 5 times XP, just like private servers, we all want that, we all want to level fast. I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that because leveling really is a huge part of Classic, and there's so many good guys like Kargos, Tactics, Grey for Days, and the list goes on, who play hardcore, and part of that being challenging is the leveling experience, which keeps completing a hardcore character a real achievement. What would be good though is once you have one level 60 complete, maybe you have the option to toggle on or off permanent rested XP on alts. I find it's a happy medium between that of private servers and official Blizzard servers, but saying that, I personally would prefer heirloom gear. It speeds it up enough where you're leveling your alts and actually makes you have to do something at the same time, so something specific like obtaining these items, even if it is by farming gold to buy them from a vendor, or if they was tied to achievements or anything, you could put these in anywhere. Being tied to reputations would be my preference though. Whilst on the leveling experience, there are some future changes I would bring forward, like the additional quest hub in Dustwallow Marsh, but I'd keep all the group quests as group quests, because as many of you would agree, community is actually a very big thing in MMOs, contrary to popular belief. You know, actually grouping with each other to do quests is a big factor of MMOs, which I think we forget. And then briefly looping back to the hardcore boys, I would enable a hardcore mode where there's multiple options before you create a character. So you create a hardcore character, but there's also a bunch of sliders that you can toggle on or off. Things such as the ability to trade, the ability to use the auction house, or even to group with non-hardcore characters. So if you create a hardcore character, you physically can only group with other people who have created hardcore characters. This can be toggled on or off. But ultimately, a perfect addition to this as well would be if you die, it goes to a character selection screen, which is a graveyard, just a graveyard section on the character selection screen, where you can sit and enjoy a nice cold gin and tonic while looking at all your past failures. Hardcore isn't for everyone, but if it was in the game in a more official capacity, this would definitely get more people involved. Remember, hardcore isn't new to Blizzard. It's been in Diablo or Diablo. I always get corrected on saying Diablo. Whatever. It's been in the game for ages. It's not new to Blizzard. It's not new to their design philosophy. So it could be something that it gets in Classic Plus. It's quite a big deal. Now, the next one's going to get some people's back up, and you're going to be sat there like, oh, Achievements are toxic. Don't put achievements in. Well, get over it. The reason I've had to start with the achievements is because a lot of future points in this video will in some fashion tie into the achievement system as well. Achievements is fairly basic. There's a lot of professions, PvP, PvE, exploration, and much more related achievements in Classic alone to keep you busy. Even though they wasn't introduced until Wrath of the Lich King, I still think they should have been in vanilla way back when. Because quite honestly, it was annoying having to go back through the old zones to get your explorer done or do old dungeons that you missed when you really wanted to be in current content. Just have it in from the start. And whilst on this, it was actually data mined that there was achievements somehow been found in the Classic game files, so who knows. Please don't forget, this would also actually give Blizzard easy content to add in future patches, because people will always be farming achievements, so on major content updates such as Blackwing Lair, making up a bunch of achievements for each boss will make some of the easiest bosses more challenging. You forget, when you kill a boss and you're doing it for an achievement, sometimes it completely changes the way that you have to face that boss or the composition that you have to take to that boss. So having just an achievement for each boss in Molten Core, each one in Blackwing Lair, etc., will actually add a lot of spice to Molten Core and Blackwing Lair, which ordinarily, let's be fair, it's quite boring. And while we're on achievements, also think back when we was talking about hardcore characters, actually getting an achievement for completing a hardcore character to level 60. I know some people will be creaming in their pants over that. But enough of achievements though, you're already probably writing angrily in the comments because you hate looking for more, Dead Minds must have achievement. Let's move on to the extremely flawed classic vanilla PvP system. This would need a full overhaul. Firstly, arenas. Yes please, this is such an easy change for them to do and it would be very welcomed. There really isn't much to talk about when it comes to the arena. You know what they are, and even if you don't do arena, you probably wouldn't see a reason for them to not be there anyway. I don't think. Okay, some PvP sets may need to be added because the Grand Marshal set wouldn't cut it for an arena reward set throughout the entire expansion because we're going to have multiple seasons. So Season 1, for example, would need to be on par with Phase 1 BIS, which would be, let's say, Molten Core. Season 2 would need to be on par with Blackwing Lair gear, so on and so forth. And instantly you're like, oh, but Scott, they'd never add new items to Classic. They'll never add any items. It's too much like hard work. Well, they already have. When they wanted to do it, when they was going to be getting money for a cash grab from the 58 boost, adding that communal garbage gear, that wasn't a problem, was it? So they do have the means to do this, but they just don't have the will. Battleground wise, sure, start with Warsong Gulch and Alterac Valley, then add a Raffi Basin, or just start with Warsong Gulch. However you want to introduce the battlegrounds really doesn't matter too much. But in future major content updates, give us Strand of the Ancients, give us Eye of the Storm, whatever else you want to throw our way. Tie the PvP titles to honour level thresholds, so I'm making these figures up, but let's say get 50k honour and then you get Private, 200k gets you Corporal, all the way up to Grand Marshal or High Warlord. Because yes, these titles would be tied to achievements, which that's why I covered achievements first, because this is another way to keep the classic titles in the game, but tying them to achievements, obviously. Touching really briefly on professions, there's multiple things that could be changed with each individual profession, but this would be an extremely long video if I went into them all. But I would have absolutely no objections to the likes of inscription or jewel crafting or even archaeology being added in future major content patches, because let's face it, yes, there's no socket in gear. Maybe they would put sockets in gear, but let's say there's no sockets in gear. Jewel crafting is more useful than just making gems, especially from 1 to 300, because it's mainly rings, necks, etc. Inscription's the only one that I would struggle with, unless they actually introduce glyphs, which wouldn't be a bad thing in a major content patch, maybe post Naxxramas. They could add the glyph system to everyone, so Maul, for example, for Druids could hit 2 targets, and then Inscription could be added at the same time. So we're not physically going to the level cap of 80 like Wrath of the Lich King, but we could be gaining Wrath of the Lich King systems. And this could be systems from any expansion. We're not going past 60, it doesn't matter. So we're not pulling content forward that we're one day going to experience. We're never going to experience this content because we're never getting past 60. Now, before we move on to PvE, let's just start with some minor and major changes to classes and how the PvE system works in general. Firstly, increase the debuff limit on bosses. This is a must, especially with 40-man raids. It needs to be higher than it is in TBC even. Remove world buffs from raids. Don't remove them from the game. You can still get your world buffs by chilling in Stormwind while you're just AFK or whatever and go and use them to farm, but you walk in an instance portal and boom, it's gone. Another minor point before we get onto the juicy ones is make flasks more available to the masses by having Black Lotus having a chance to come from high-level herbs, much like future expansions. And here we go, one you might love or hate. Have Blood Elves and Draenei in from the start. So Paladin and Shaman across faction, and while we are on factions, balance needs to be addressed, especially with there being arena in this iteration of a game. A rework of the overpowered racials would definitely need to happen, but this video will be about 15 hours long if I start going into the overpowered racials and why it causes faction imbalance. But it's definitely something that would need to be addressed with arena being in the game. So then some changes which affect specific classes, just to bring them more in line. This is just a real top level view of what sort of things you could see happening in a Classic Plus version of the game if it went along these lines. Much like Wrath of the Lich King, firstly, give feral attack power on weapons that scales appropriately with the weapon DPS. Give paladins their taunt and potentially the addition of bonus stamina to certain talents just to bring them closer to warriors and druids. Give priests vampiric touch as a trained ability or a talent. For ferals, replace claw with mangle or make it a trained ability at 50. Give paladins crusader strike as a trained ability. Alleviate some mana issues for the hybrid casters like Ellie shamans and boomies by adding MP5 to talents or reworking things like clear casting for Ellie shamans as it happened in TBC. Remove hunter dead zones and potentially give them steady shot or even a bestial wrath I wouldn't be opposed against. Add Felguard to demonology warlock talents. I think in a game like this, which I'm making up off the top of my head, I think having the Felguard in would be a good thing, but I still think it needs to be tied to talents because I wouldn't much like facing an Affliction or a Destruction Warlock that's using a Felguard. Make Life Bloom a trained ability for druids, and also Cyclone for PvP utility would be nice. Give priests prayer mending. I mean, I think you get the picture. I think you get what I'm trying to get across here. Tune the classes to make all of them viable, but in a level 60 environment. And like I said when we were talking about future content, remember, we're not going to get any of this in a future expansion. So this is more about balancing the classes to make them all useful at level 60, because otherwise we'll never see any of these future abilities. So why not add the ones that actually add balance? So now you've got all these balanced classes and shiny abilities to use at level 60, but what do you do with them? I don't know. No, I don't. Seriously, can someone tell me? What are we doing? What are we doing at Endgame? I mean, that's the important thing. Oh, actually, I've got a few ideas. Now, the biggest problem with vanilla dungeons, and to a certain extent, even dungeons further on than just vanilla, so we could even talk about TBC or Wrath of the Lich King. Once you've got your pre-bisque gear and you're raiding Molten Core, they become pointless. And when I've been streaming and talking about these topics, people have been saying that they should just add heroic versions. But again, once you get the gear, you don't need to do heroics. And they become pointless. So for me to add longevity to these dungeons, first, there can be achievements added to the dungeons, much like Wrath dungeons. Make them hard, and I mean really hard to obtain. So much like I said for Molten Core and Blackwing Lair, add achievements to specific bosses in specific dungeons. Then this is the big one for me. Vanilla mythic dungeons. Different affixes each week, harder mythics using the key system. It keeps them relevant forever, because that's the thing. It's about how do you make this content last a lifetime. You're not bothered about the gear. You're not going into a mythic dungeon trying to get gear. You're just trying to push the highest key possible just for big flexes in Ironforge to say you've done mythic plus 6,072. Don't know where I got that number from. It's all about achieving greatness. At this point, you're definitely sat there thinking, none of this, literally none of it will ever happen. You're probably right, and it's a shame, but can you imagine if this really did happen? There's more to come. But look, if Blizzard really want to do something different and bring people back that they've lost to Final Fantasy and a massive chunk impending that they're going to lose next month to New World, this is the extremes they need to ascend to. Another thing I'd like to see, bit of a crazy one, but non-current content turns flex. So you can go do 10 to 40 man MC when BWL's out. The amount of loot that drops is lower, obviously, and the difficulty scales based on the amount of people who are in it. And for flex style, we'd say no bindings. You know, legendaries only drop when you're doing it as a 40 man non-flex group. But when you get to the point of like Nax, for example, unless you are still going back chasing Thunder Furies, etc., you know, it's trying to keep content relevant still. And while it's hard to keep it relevant, you can make it fun. You know, and I think flex makes it fun because Friday night with the boys, oi oi, 10 man MC. Now this video really could go on forever if I start getting into every little detail, but overall this is how I'd like to see a Classic Plus. Of course adding new raids after Nax that fit in with the current timeline, which isn't time walking, would be nice as well, but I'm thinking of things that are really easy for Blizzard to implement that they already have in the game files of future expansions. I want to leave you on the most wild one, and this is the most wild one that I've mentioned in this entire video, which you can guess is going to be pretty game breaking, but one that would make me continue to play Classic Plus forever would be instanced player housing. There's so many empty or closed houses in major cities, such as Stormwind, Ironforge, for example. It would add a gold sink to buy one as well. You can place your old gear down in your house, so once you've got tier 2, you can have tier 1 showing off in your house. When you invite people into a party or you're the leader of a raid, they can walk in your house and have a look around. And they don't really need to even develop anything. They can take a small house that is already in the Stormwind, for example, with an open door, put a closed door on it, and instance it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a developer. That could take months, but they've got months. Well, they haven't, because from what I hear, Blizzard HQ's burning down at the moment. They've probably got about 15 minutes, but hopefully they can move quick. A lot of people would like player housing. A lot of people won't like player housing, but we were sold it as a place to call home in Warlords of Draenor, which was our garrison, and it wasn't great, was it? But just an instance player house, if you want to buy one so you can store your gear in there, you know, take away the bank, I don't really care. Or, no, I'd still rather keep the bank, but I want a house as well. Now, look, let me know what you loved about the video. Let me know what you hated about the video. I appreciate it's all just out the box thinking. It's like, probably never going to happen. I hope Blizzard see this and realise that actually some of this would be a good idea. Let me know what you think was good and what was bad, you know, genuinely. If there was parts of this where you was like, yeah, I wouldn't mind achievements, that's good, but no, I hate player housing, don't want player housing. Or if you're like, well, having demon hunters and monks is ridiculous, you know, absolutely ridiculous. I just tried to put a spin on it, so like I said, time walking, abusing the timeline, being able to bring things back from the future, for example, to that, you know, it doesn't matter. It's Classic Plus. Lore does not matter. You know, they'll bring new content out. They can bring new content in that, you know, is relevant to the timeline, but everything that we do in Caverns of Time, what happens in Caverns of Time stays in Caverns of Time. And that's where I'm leaving the video. If you liked it, definitely smash like. It really helps out. Subscribe to the channel and I'll see you on the next one. Oh, and you can join the channel as a member if you want to. If you really love me, that would be great. But cheers, guys. Take it easy.